Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Hooked on Sports here on Apple Podcast and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasting streaming services. My name is John Flynn, and thank you for joining me today. So it is Tuesday, March 24th. I'm actually recording this episode at quarter after 1 in the morning, so I have all the time and space to myself to record an episode today. So we have a lot of things on tap for you today. So of course, I'll be locking in my season predictions for the 2026 Major League Baseball season. So I will be getting into that towards the latter portion of the show, which is actually our main segment. So I have win-loss records for all 30 teams. I'm giving you my awards picks, my preseason picks for league MVPs, the Cy Youngs, the rookies of the year in both the American and the National League. So I'll be getting into that, and of course, how I see the postseason transpiring 7 months from now, and 7 months from today, I believe would be Game 2 of the World Series, assuming the schedule didn't change from last year to this year in terms of the postseason. So I'm also excited, all amped up for the baseball season, but I'm gonna give you I'm gonna deviate from that first, and now I'm gonna give you some quick takes on the NCAA men's basketball tournament, and then I'm also gonna give you some quick takes around the NFL offseason because I have not given you an NFL take in 6 weeks, so I'm gonna get into that. So I thought the action over the weekend was off the charts across the spectrum of the NCAA. Well, we had some exciting games. So we had the best teams in basketball flex their muscles, and we had some really interesting storylines develop throughout the course of the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. And I think the focus of conversation, and I think more rightly so than any other of the regions, is the East region because because we start with the beginning. TCU defeated Ohio State just to start, and then Duke was down 11 points against Siena at halftime. They wound up coming back and winning that game, and then they get a Pat Ngongba back. They beat TCU much more handily, a much better performance by the Blue Devils, and it sets up a fascinating game against St. John's on Friday night. So St. John's, I didn't know how they were going to come out against Northern Iowa, a team that's built on that's built on defense. And not only did St. John's beat Northern Iowa, it was shockingly decisive. They beat Northern Iowa by 26 points. And then on Sunday they had a dandy of a ball game with Kansas. St. John's was up for most of the game. They were up as many as 14 points in the second half. Kansas came all the way back and tied it at the end of towards the end of regulation, and then Dylan Darling hit a layup for a buzzer beater for his first basket and only basket of the game. As St. John's beat Kansas at the gun there. So Duke and St. John's I think is going to be a tremendous ball game coming up on Friday. And there's actually something to note here. And if you're a fan of Duke, this could be interesting because in each of the 5 seasons that Duke won national championships, they beat St. John's at one point during at some point during that season. there's definitely some history that could favor Duke if they beat St. John's, and look, I think St. John's has some things going for them in terms of the physicality, in terms of the veteran experience, and Rick Pitino has been telling people that he's really going after the transfer portal these days. Mainly because he thinks the transfer portal is the best way to win in March Madness, and now 3 years after Saint John's what was left in the wilderness. So Rick Pitino has taken the Johnnies out of the wilderness, and they are on to the Sweet 16 for the first time in 27 years. So I think it's gonna be it's gonna be a tremendous sporting event on Friday, the first of a double dip from DC. And I'm really fascinated about Michigan State and UConn. Michigan State took care of business. They got to the Sweet 16. They pretty handily defeated a solid Louisville squad, and then UConn beating UCLA. I think is kind of a gigantic deal for UConn because UConn was struggling. They barely beat Furman. So there was a lot of nervous tension there for UConn, but they survived and advanced, and then they beat UCLA pretty handily. Now it didn't help for UCLA that they didn't have Tyler Bildo, one of their key pieces on Sunday, and so I think UConn is now in the Sweet 16. I think they're going to beat Michigan State. I don't think it's a guarantee, but I think they can win that game. Which kind of, I mean, and the Tyler Bilodeau injury kind of leads me to the another big take for the NCAA tournament so far. It is the impact of the injuries has been pretty profound because you had UCLA. Yeah, you had North Carolina was without Caleb Wilson. That they got bounced in round one. So BYU was without Richie Saunders. They got bounced by Texas in round one. Damn, you had Texas Tech that they got by Akron, but they were but the injury to JT Toppin finally caught up to them. Gonzaga got bounced in round two by Texas, and that and no Braden Huff doomed the Zags, and I should have seen that one coming as well. So I think you look at that, and now Alabama, despite not having Aiden Holloway because of a domestic violence dispute, they're on to the Sweet 16, and they've got a difficult matchup in my opinion against the top seed in their region, Michigan. So I think we'll see how they hold up on that as well. Um, let's see who else am I missing here? I think those are really really the big ones to discuss there. So yes. So the lack of continuity across all these teams like BYU, Gonzaga, and UCLA among others. So with that, so that's been a big thing. And then the other thing I discussed, and this is what I discussed on my Instagram reels, that I posted to the podcast Instagram, which is by the way at hooked underscore on sports. I also mentioned that last year I forgot to add in to this fact that last year was the first year where all 16 teams in the Sweet 16 since the tournament expanded were all power conference teams. The first time it ever happened was last year. Well, it happened again this year. We had 6 teams in the ACC. No, excuse me, Is it in the Big Ten advance? You have Michigan State, you have Michigan, you have Purdue, you have Nebraska, Illinois, and Iowa. Nebraska and Illinois will play each other for a trip to the Elite Eight on Thursday, I believe. I mean, let me see the game between um, Nebraska and Iowa is on Thursday. So the winner will play the winner of Illinois versus Houston in the Elite Eight. I think Illinois versus Houston, I think is going to be a fantastic matchup. You got, yeah, I mean, you have two teams that enter the tournament with serious Final Four of hopefulness. And look, and also another thing too with that, Florida got bounced by Iowa in round two, and this was despite Bennett Sturts going 0 for 9 from 3-point range, that was a big deal with that as well because look, I mean I picked Florida to go to the Final Four. I don't regret that. But I also said I don't know if I said it to other people or on here, but I won't fight you if you pick Houston to go to the Final Four. I wouldn't have fought you if you put Illinois in the Final Four. I think those are two outstanding teams, and I believe the winner of the Illinois Houston game will beat the winner of the Nebraska Iowa game in the South region, and the games are in Houston, and Houston has the home city advantage. So I think everything is there for the Cougars to go back to the Final Four and maybe possibly make a run at the championship. So you have that. So again, six teams from the Big Ten. You had four teams in the SEC make it to the Sweet 16, and they were Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas. Um, and so I don't think I would have been so surprised if that you were talking about Sweet 16 and Florida is not one of those four teams, but Bama, Arkansas are great. Darius Acuff showing what he can do, and why I think he's going to give Arizona everything they can handle. Tennessee. Now, the pick I regret the most from the first two rounds was not having Tennessee in the Sweet 16 over Virginia. I should have known better. Only one team in the ACC made the Sweet 16, and that's of course Duke. So the other five teams, the two from the Big East, St. John's and UConn, and St. John's, UConn, and Duke are all actually in the same bracket. So in DC, you're gonna have four of the most rabid fan bases, and four of the most passionate fan bases in all of college basketball. They will all be on display in DC over the weekend. So that's good stuff. I'm still curious of why they put St. John's, UConn, and Villanova, and UConn in the same region when two other brackets didn't have any Big East teams. But besides, that's the point in and on itself. In terms of the Big 12, you had three teams from there make the Sweet 16. You have Arizona make the Sweet 16. You had Iowa State make the Sweet 16, and then Houston from the Big 12 making the Sweet 16. So you got so everything is a 1, 2, 3, and 4 except for the fifth seeded St. John's, sixth seeded Tennessee, ninth seeded Iowa, and 11th seeded Texas, and Evan Miyakawa's instead chart on underseeded, overseeded. All four teams that were lower than a four were all part of the group of teams that were underseeded based upon the strength of their teams. So I think that's something to think about next year. So I still think it's going to be Duke, Arizona, Michigan. And I think Houston is going to beat Illinois on Thursday. So I think it's going to be Houston that winds up going to the Final Four when it's all said and done there. So it should be great stuff. In terms of the scheduling for the region. So because I know the East region, their games are on Friday and Sunday. It's not because I know that that the South region games are on Thursday. And as well as the Michigan Midwest region, their games are on Thursday, and then the West region, which is Arizona, their games will be on Friday and Sunday as well. So it's gonna be tremendous for weekend. And by the way, the ratings are up from last year. So I think while there hasn't been the big Cinderella this year, the brackets they turn out pretty good. I think the selection committee now has a better feel on how to properly seed teams. So maybe we'll get that perfect bracket sooner rather than later. Hopefully, before they inevitably expand the tournament to 72 or 76 teams. So now I want to get and now I have not given you NFL takes in a while, and I think with off season and the big wave of free agency behind us, I just want to give you some quickies on that before we get into our baseball picks here. So no, number one, I don't think I don't think any team has owned the offseason right now better than the Rams. And and the Rams, they had some weird losses during last season. So like the special teams disaster against Philly comes to mind. Losing to Seattle and letting Jackson Smith and Jigba, who by the way got paid a handsome amount, 168 mil on a 4-year extension with 42 mil guaranteed, are worth every single penny. So that take so I think that was I think the biggest reason why the Rams lost the NFC Championship game, because they didn't have the dudes to cover guys like Rashid Shaheed and Jackson Smith and Jigba. Well, they traded for the 29th overall pick and a couple of others for Chiefs corner Trent McDuffie, and then they brought in McDuffie's Kansas City teammate Jalen Watson on the deal. So now you have a totally revamped secondary. And in addition to what the Rams are as an organization with Snead and McVay and Stafford, Nakua, Adams, the lines. I think if the season were to begin today, it doesn't. The season starts on the Wednesday after Labor Day this year. If the season were to start tomorrow, I would lock in the Rams to win the Super Bowl. That's how impressive, that's how amazing I think the Rams are. So I think the Rams are gonna be are gonna be special. I also love what the Raiders did, and this was kind of lost in the shuffle there. So because the Raiders brought in Tyler Linderbaum, that they brought in a couple of other key pieces on defense, and then one of the most bizarre turn of events occurred for the Ravens and the Raiders. The Raiders had agreed to trade Max Crosby to the Baltimore Ravens for 2 first-round picks, but the Ravens flunked his physical, meaning the deal was a no-go. So you had that, but now I think things are setting up nicely for Fernando Mendoza to have some success with Glenn Kubiak and with Tom Brady's stuff and John Spytuck's fingerprints now becoming part of the roster and part of the organization. So that's going to be good as well for the Raiders. The Ravens did well. Importantly, when they brought in Trey Hendrickson, on a 4 year, 120 mil contract, 120 million dollar plus contract there. So you definitely had that as well. Now, I kind of think the Giants flew under the radar a little bit. They brought in Isaiah Likely. They totally revamped the special teams. And I think the Giants have had a decent offseason so far. I will say, but this has been kind of an underwhelming crop of free agents compared to years past, but but I think the Giants did okay, for that. Now, I do think a team that's having a good off season is not necessarily a team that's going to contend this year, but I think John Eric Sullivan coming in. And instead of making Chris Greer's damage look worse, for the future outlook for the Miami Dolphins, yeah, he is instead absorbing all the damage. So he is letting guys go. Through trade. The Dolphins got a first round pick back for the Denver Broncos in exchange for Jalen Waddle. So it's clear that the Dolphins need to totally reset, and I think John Eric Sullivan. Remember, he is part of an organization that has yielded some great general managers like Elliott Wolf and John Schneider, among others, the two Super Bowl GMs from last season. So, both were taught by the Packers brass, and now John Eric Sullivan is looking to do the same in Miami. And I also love that they brought in Malik Willis on a $22 million a year contract, because look, quarterbacks these days are getting 35 are demanding 35, 40, 50 mil a year. That they got Malik Willis for 22 million a year. So I think not only is that a coup for that, because the quarterback market was kind of not really there for a team this year, but I think the Dolphins are doing the right thing. They are totally resetting the organization, and they know the only way out of it, out of the peril that's been circling the franchise for the last 25 years, is to build through the draft, and that's exactly what the Miami Dolphins are going to do. Now, they have a lot of dead cap, so it's gonna be tricky to get through this season and next, but this is all about the future here for the Dolphins, that's what it was there. Now, the teams that I've been disappointed in this offseason, I think two that come to mind. I think the entire AFC South got weaker. Maybe because the Houston Texans traded Titus Howard, their best offensive tackle, to the Cleveland Browns, which that makes absolutely no sense to me, because the Texans had one of the worst offensive lines in football, and that was the reason they lost by a lot to the New England Patriots. In addition to C.J. Stroud being terrible and inaccurate in that game, but that's the point. But I think Jacksonville is taking a step back this year. This upcoming season, they lost Devin Lloyd in free agency. I think he signed with Carolina, I believe, and then they let Travis Etienne go. He's gone now to the New Orleans Saints. So I think Jacksonville. I think there's usually about 6 to 8 teams that make the playoffs of a year ago that are primed to miss it this year. And remember, Jacksonville does not have a first round pick this year, and they're relying heavily on Travis Hunter, who is better as a corner than he is as a wide receiver, which is why I disagree with the take in the first place. Now, give Liam Cohen credit, give Jim Gladstone credit for the success last season in Jacksonville, but I don't believe the current model in Jacksonville is one that's going to yield sustained success there. Um, that's the Indianapolis. I did not like how they handled the wide receiver situation. They gave Alec Pierce a 4-year, $114 million contract, somewhere along those lines, and they traded Michael Pittman Jr. to the Steelers. And I did not understand for a late round pick swap. Now I don't understand this at all. I don't view Alec Pierce as a top 25 receiver in the National Football League. I mean, the Colts apparently do, but I disagree with that. And then the Tennessee Titans, because the Titans spent a lot of money, but I'm very perplexed on the plan here for the Tennessee Titans. Besides making a new logo, a new logo otherwise, but they brought in Wandale Robinson, they on a 4-year $78 million contract. They brought in Daniel Bellinger on an $8 million a year contract. That makes absolutely no sense. So, I mean they brought a lot of guys in who weren't part of the winning puzzle for the Giants and the Jets. So but kind of tells you how the league feels about the Robert Saleh hire in Tennessee. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now the Titans are going to be better. They're going to win. I think they're going to win more than 3 games this year, but I still think that they are a ways to go. So in getting and building the way to sustain success. With that as well. So. You look at the Titans. I think Seattle. I think Seattle did good by JSN. By giving him that contract, but they've lost a lot. They lost a lot. So in free agency, and I could very much see a possibility where where the Seahawks are the third best team in their own division this year. So we'll see how that transpires. Then a couple of other notes. Kyler Murray signs with the Minnesota Vikings. I think that is an interesting deal because now it tells you how the organization feels about JJ McCarthy, and there's some many doubts with the quarterback room in Minnesota. So but I do think this is a low risk, high reward type of signing. We just need to see what Kevin O'Connell can do to resuscitate the career of Kyler Murray, like he did a couple of years ago with Sam Darnold. Like he was unable to do with JJ McCarthy because of the knee injury McCarthy suffered as a rookie, but. But really, the goal for the Vikings this offseason for me is for me to get them is for them to get me to pick them to win the division because I think the Bears regressed a little bit with the strength of their roster. You still don't know about the Packers because they lost Jeff Hafley to a head coaching job, and Micah Parsons. We don't know how much he's going to play this upcoming season, so we'll see about that. See about that as well. So with that being said, I'm now going to turn the attention to predicting the 2026 Major League Baseball season, and I think this is going. I mean, obviously the dark clouds over the season is the expiration of the current collective bargaining agreement, and there are signs that a potential lockout is on the way. It could be even uglier this time than it was 5 years ago. So so I think there's a lot there, but in the meantime, I think you're going to have a super competitive season. I because and let's like the American League for example. I could see the World Series case for 8 different teams this year. And I think it's kind of crazy with that because I think the gap between between the yeah, 8 well, between who are in my opinion the 8 best teams in the American League is so tight that making even the best team in that league the playoffs isn't an automatic but given the roster I think it's going to be it is going to be just that so I think it's gonna be a fantastic season, all across, and then the National League, I could see, how 5 different teams make it to the make it to at least the LCS or the World Series, so we'll get into that in just a second. So I'm gonna start with my American League playoff teams. I've got the Boston Red Sox winning the American League East, and I think this is a tight division. I think you can make the case that 4 of the 6 or 7 best teams in the American League are all from that division. I think the Yankees are going to be are going to be good again. I think Toronto still has a lot of what they had from that World Series roster last year. Baltimore making some big moves to bolster their offense, but I just think the Red Sox with the rotation that they have, I think you love the Rangers Suarez pickup for the season. So I think the Red Sox have with one of the 2 best pitching staffs in the American League. I think they wind up winning the division and I've got them going 88 and 74. In the AL Central, I am picking the Tigers, and I was torn and between Detroit and Kansas City in this regard, but I think the Tigers bringing in Framber Valdez, I think is kind of a big deal. So because I think for a year the Tigers might have as good a 1-2 punch as any rotation will have in the sport with Tyreek Skubal and Framber Valdez. I think there's enough enough bats in that lineup for Detroit that I think they can put up a lot of runs. So give me the Tigers to win the American League Central. I'm picking the Seattle Mariners to win the American League West. I think the Mariners are as good as whole as complete a team as there is in the American League. I think you'll love what they added to the lineup. The starting pitching is superb. So this was a team that was 8 outs away from their first ever fall classic, and would it be fitting in a city where and so where the Seahawks just celebrated their 50th season with the Super Bowl appearance and a championship, wouldn't it be fitting that Seattle's baseball team in their 50th season of existence wins a pennant? So it was tough between Seattle and Texas, but I've got Seattle winning the American League West. Now, it's my 3 wild cards here. My first wild card is the Texas Rangers, and this is kind of a bold take here, but I thought the Rangers were good enough to win more than 90 games last year. That did not happen. I think they ran into a buzzsaw of bad luck. They only want that underperformed their talent and wasted some great pitching. And the news for the Rangers is that they have great pitching with Eovaldi and Jacob deGrom with that rotation. I think a full year of Jacob deGrom in that Rangers rotation, I think would feed a lot of families in the Dallas Fort Worth area. So I'm picking the Rangers to make the playoffs. I'm picking the Yankees to make the playoffs. Now, I don't think the Yankees had a great offseason by any means. They didn't make a big splash, but by any means. But I just think the pitching is going to be really good. I think the bullpen, despite losing Luke Weaver and Devin Williams to the Mets this offseason, I still think that the Yankees are gonna be really good. I think the rotation is can be pretty good if we can if they can get if they can get it's a good full healthy season from Cam Schlittler and the return of Garrett Cole. I think is gonna play a big deal here. I have the Yankees making the playoffs. And my third wild card team, this was honestly a tough one, but I'm locking in the Blue Jays. I just think the Blue Jays are too talented of a roster to not be a playoff team this year. I know they lost Bo Bichette to the Mets, but and that was really the big loss. But in terms of in terms of the guys they have on that roster, it is and still couldn't believe that they couldn't they couldn't win Game 7 against the Dodgers, and they had opportunities to win that game, and they just couldn't. But I do think the Blue Jays return to the playoffs. Um, with that. I mean, they still have Springer. They still have Vlad. This is the first year of the new contract for Vladdy Jr. They added a couple of pieces I like this offseason. Dylan Cease, I think being atop that rotation with Kevin Gossman, I think makes you feel a lot better. And then the addition of Tyler Rogers to that bullpen, I think it's going to be good for Rogers and the Jays, as a whole here. So I've got the Blue Jays in. A tough to leave Kansas City out with Bobby Witt Jr., Benny Pasquantino, among others. But I just don't know how if Kansas City's pitching is gonna be good enough to supplement some excellent offensive firepower atop of that lineup with Michael Garcia and Bobby Witt Jr. and Benny Pasquantino to win you a lot of games. Now they are moving the fences in at Kauffman Stadium, so I think that could boost the home run numbers for the team that for that roster. But Kansas City was a tough admission. Baltimore was a tough exclusion as well. Because I know I think the lineup it can score a lot of runs. So, but I have questions about the pitching and their ability to stay healthy and their ability to win you ball games. So those were tough exclusions there. Now in terms of the game, in terms of the win loss records, so for each, I'm gonna give everyone plays 162. So I'll give you my win numbers for each team. I have in the AL East, I have the Red Sox at 88. I have the Yankees at 87. I have the Jays at 86. Baltimore 83. Tampa and the Tampa Bay Rays 76. I got the Detroit Tigers with 87 wins. I got the Kansas City Royals with 85 wins. The Cleveland Guardians take a step back. They win 79. The White Sox win 72, and the Twins finished with 60. I have them winning 65 games this year. In the AL West, I got Seattle at 91. I got Texas at 89. I got the Houston Astros at 83. I got the Athletics at 77, and I got the Angels at 67 for the season. So those are my win predictions for the AL. And the way I think it's going to transpire, I have Carter Jensen, the young catcher for the Kansas City Royals, winning the American League Rookie of the Year. I think I'm picking Garrett Crochet of the Red Sox to win the Cy Young in the American League over Tyreek Skubal. And I'm going to give you a dark horse pick for league MVP, and that's Junior Caminero of the Tampa Rays. And Caminero coming off a beast of a World Baseball Classic. And Camino hit 41 home runs last year. And I think my bold prediction is I think Junior Camino hits 50 bombs this year en route to winning an MVP. So I'm gonna go Caminero there. In terms of the wild cards, I've got the range. I got uh the Rangers beating the Yankees. I got the Tigers beating the Blue Jays. And then in the division series, I've got so I have let's see, I have the Red Sox over the top. What is it? The Red Sox over the Tigers, and I got the Mariners over the Rangers. And then in the ALCS, give me the Seattle Mariners to go to the World Series for the first time in team history. I have them beating the Red Sox in the American League Championship Series. So that's where I'm at with the American League. And now the National League. I kind of feel like there are 5 teams really that can that can win a playoff series or two this year, depending on how things go. So this is these are going to be my official picks for the National League. I'm picking the Mets to win the National League East this year. I think the Mets have the best, most complete roster in the entire division. And I mean, because if you look at of how the Mets had their offseason planned out, they completely retooled their roster. So they let go of Nimmo and McNeil. Edwin Diaz was a tough loss, obviously, and then losing Pete Alonso as well. So they brought in some dudes as well: Marcus Simeon, Jorge Polanco, Bo Bichette, Luis Robert Jr., Freddie Peralta. Those are all key additions for Mets squad. I feel this is the best I felt about the Mets rotation going into a season in quite some time. I think Freddie Peralta, Nolan McLean, and a healthy Kota Senga could be as good a threesome as it gets. In terms of a starting pitching a starting pitching situation. I think you look at the I think you look at with Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, a top bet lineup with Bichette. I think you have as good a top 3 as there is in the National League with that. So I think it's going to be tough. Obviously, I think it's a competitive division with the Phillies and the Braves, but I think both of those squads have some major questions going into the season. So I think the Mets are the best team of the division, and I think they'll win their first NL East crown since 2015 this upcoming season. National League Central. I gotta tell you, this was the division that I was it's that I was least decided on. So because I think you look at the Brewers and the Cubs as being a class above their own in the division. But I think what the Cubs did, this offseason, bringing in Alex Bregman to essentially be the Kyle Tucker replacement, and the metrics from last year said that they were a better team than their record indicates. They pushed the Brewers to a decisive 5th game in their division series. It was one they lost, but I'm gonna pick the Cubs to win the division. I just think the Cubs have enough pitching that could win you games, and I think that offense can put up 800 runs this year. I just have that feeling about that for the Cubs, and also not to mention they just inked their stud center fielder Pico Armstrong to to a long-term contract just hours before before this podcast began. Um, and I think he's going to be in for a monster season as well. So, I just we don't have for we don't have numbers yet for that contract, but it's going to be a pretty good team friendly deal for the Cubs there. Dodgers obviously win the West. I think they hit 100 this year. I don't love the over under of 103.5 for the Dodgers because all the Dodgers are going to do is that their season is going to be solely judged on how they do in October. So I think the Dodgers will rest guys, obviously, if need be, but the Dodgers are such an organizational juggernaut, and even if they don't have things at the deadline, have even if they do have holes in the roster at the deadline, they obviously have the prospect power to make trades happen. So we'll see how what the Dodgers do there. Now, in terms of my three wild cards, the Brewers are my first wild card. I think you actually kind of have to feel good about your rotation depth for the Brewers, because in the Freddie Peralta trade, the Brewers acquired Brandon Stroh from the Mets. He wound up making the team. I think he could be a pretty solid addition for the Milwaukee Brewers. So I think you feel good about the roster, and especially with the starting pitching, and also not to mention the Brewers have won 90 plus games each in each of the last 3 years. So there's definitely some confidence and continuity that you have to be obsessed with if you are a Brewers fan. I think the Brewers are the first wild card in the National League. My second wild card team is going to be the Philadelphia Phillies, and I'm reluctantly putting them in because I think the Phillies have Dave Dombrowski has quietly done a solid job the last few weeks, making sure they lock up Jesus Luzardo and Christopher Sanchez onto team for long-term extensions. And I still think I still think some of the core players that are left, I look with Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber. I think they can still do enough to help to contribute. I still think Kyle Schwarber is in for another 40+ bomb season. I think Trey Turner's gonna have a good season. I think Alec Bohm is in for a good season. I think Andrew Painter, I think is gonna make an impact or as a rookie for the Phillies. So I think the Phillies are gonna wind up making the playoffs. I don't think they're World Series caliber. If you were to tell me that the Phillies are that the goal of the offseason was to equip their roster to defeat the Los Angeles Dodgers in a playoff series, I don't think they did a good job on that. But are they better than 60% of the National League? You bet, and that's why I'm picking the Phillies to make the playoffs as a wild card. And the third wild card team, I mean, I don't feel as confident about this, because you never know what else might transpire with everything with all the injury losses so far. Give me the Braves. I just don't think the Braves are going to be as bad as they were last year. They obviously started the season 0-7 with that West Coast swing. They got swept by the Padres and the Dodgers, and it felt like doomsday from there on out because with the historical fact that no team had ever made the playoffs after starting the season 0-7 or worse. I don't think that's going to happen this year. I think Ronald Acuna Jr. being back and if he's healthy, I think he is going to be in the discussion for league MVP. I think he's going to have another 30-30 season if he's healthy and if he plays like 120, 130 games this season. So I think you figure that you remember you also the other familiar faces if you've been following the Braves from recent years like Ozzy Albies, Austin Riley, Matt Olson are all back. So the rotation and not having Strider and Schwellenbach scares me. But I think if I think you trust Chris Sale to have a big season, and I think the bullpen. I think adding Robert Suarez to that bullpen, I think was kind of a gigantic deal for the Braves in terms of the bullpen. I don't feel great about this, but I have the Braves making the playoffs as the third and last wild card in the National League. And the tough omissions were San Francisco. I think San Francisco. What was one that I had a hard time leaving out. But but they are. Listen, I think the Giants are a decent team, but what have they done really this offseason to put them over the Mets, the Phillies, and the Braves? That I'm just not convinced right now. Remember Tony Vitelli coming in to be the new manager. He comes directly from the college ranks. So it's gonna be a fascinating team to watch and how their season transpires. So we'll definitely find out a lot about that as we move along. My win totals for all 15 teams in the National League. I got the Mets at 90, the Phillies at 87, the Braves at 86. The Marlins take a step back and win 73, and I think the Nats win 64. I've got the Cubs at 94, the Brewers at 90, the Pirates. I really wanted to make them an 80+ win team, but I think the 75 to 80 win range makes sense. I officially have them at 79. Cincinnati takes a step back. I have them winning 78, and I got St. Louis winning 71 games. But I do think that over-under of 69.5 for St. Louis is kind of disrespectful. I got the Dodgers at 100, the Giants at 85, the Diamondbacks at 81, the Padres at 78, and I got the Rockies at 59, which would beat their over/under of 54.5, 55.5, whatever that is. So in terms of my awards winners, I've got Nolan McLean winning the Rookie of the Year for the Mets, for in the National League. I'm gonna give you a not as trendy pick for the Cy Young. Give me Christopher Sanchez of the Phillies as my Cy Young, and then I have Shohei Ohtani winning an MVP for a fourth successive season for the Dodgers. Well, the wild card series, I got the Mets over the Braves. I got the Brewers over the Phillies. On to the division series, I got the Dodgers beating the Brewers. I think the Cubs will beat the Mets in a division series round, and then in the league championship series, I've got the Dodgers over the Cubs in the National League Championship Series, and then I have the Dodgers. I think they complete the three-peat and beat Seattle in the World Series coming up in 2026. So some my baseball predictions for the season are locked in. Thank you so very much for listening to my podcast, and remember to follow the podcast on Instagram at hooked_on sports for the latest on the and some of my reels reacting to big events in the world of sports. So that's definitely stay tuned for that. But until then, this is John Flynn saying so long. I'll be back here on the podcast pretty soon. Take care, everybody, and so long.